This company allows neuroscientists to study with precision the sensory, motor, and cognitive impact of injuries and diseases, reshaping the assessment of brain injuries. Introducing Kinarm. Hey guys, and welcome to one more episode of Builder Nation. For today's interview, I'm Vivian-Scott, President and CEO at the company transforming neurological assessment. So welcome, man. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining Builder Nation.
Pleasure to be here. So my name is Vivian-Scott. I'm the President and CEO, as you introduced. And I've been with the company for a long time now, even pre-incorporation. So one of the interesting things about Kinarm is that we essentially came out of a project, a translation neuroscientist inside a university, created this technology for his own research, and then decided he wanted to share it with others. So I got involved back in the days when I was what we call a technology transfer officer, doing business development activities, back office support, those sorts of things that would allow him to say, hey, my friend wants one of these. Can we build one for them? Okay, we'll figure out the logistics. We'll fund you to it, provide you a line of credit, things like that. So my experience with the company has always come from how do we allow this technology, this really useful tool that was developed for one person's research program, to go into other neuroscientist research programs. The work that they have done over the last 20 years has proven to us that this tool could now have a lot of utility, a lot of benefit for the management of brain injuries. So we've taken this great long path, basic tool for a neuroscientist, to now something that might be useful in the clinic. That's what we're hoping. Now, to do that activity, my experience as a technology transfer manager was really diverse. I'm an engineer by training, not in the field with which this technology really is applied. I was a chemical engineer from the University of Waterloo, but really loved the sort of business development, creative aspects of creating new companies for these new technologies. I also have a finance and MBA background for working in the telecom industry. So those two things together really kind of anchored me in being able to provide general management, business management to the company. So my role here is really as a general manager to kind of pull all the pieces together. I also do sales and marketing, yes, but I leave all the technology development to our co-founders who really own the technical file.
Okay. Wow, really interesting background. Thank you so much for sharing. Having the MBA and the engineering part, all of these skills of management, I think it's what makes you a CEO, right? And the president as well. So you must be all hands on deck, right?
Exactly, all hands. And being able to sort of fill the holes, fill the gaps with a really small team, because you want most of your team to be focused on technology development and product realization. So you've got to figure out how can you kind of wrap around them, all those other functions. Big companies, we have lots of people doing this. I'm one person. You got to carry many hats.
A lot. Probably you must have a lot of challenges in your day-to-day. Now that we have your both sides, can you share what are the most typical challenges talking on the business side and on the hardware part as well?
Great big questions. From the day-to-day side, of course, with any company that is really what we like to say, eating what we kill, meaning we have to sell product. We have to sell product to our customers. That revenue is what pays for our expenses, pays for our salaries, pays for our ongoing research and development. One of the trickiest things I have to figure out in the day is how do I balance my activities to ensure that I'm always focused on revenue, but I'm still maintaining that support for other activities such as quality management. That takes up a lot of time and that needs to be done. So that's kind of my own internal struggle, how to balance out those many different hats in a single day. Within the company itself, I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit and very much near to your heart is the challenges of actually making a hardware product, right? One of the things that our co-founder, Ian Brown, has said to me time and time again, and we have to build a robust product because we don't want that product to fail. We don't want it to break in the field because if it does, it's really hard as a small team to go out there and fix it. Expensive for us, expensive for the customer, right? So what we did when he designed the Kinarm for essentially what we call commercial release to be very robust. So all the components, everything has been around for a long time. And we know and trust that if a system fails in that field, it's going to be something like a computer or something that we can manage. But the robots themselves, they're going to be great. So I think from a hardware company perspective, that's one of the biggest challenges a new company in the space has to deal with is how are you going to service your customers? Because that relationship with your customer is key. You want them there to be the happy customer that says, yes, this is a great product. You should go get one of these, right? Want them to be the referenceable customer. So to keep them happy, it's got to work, and it's got to work all the time and not be a service issue for them.
Wow, totally great answer. And that's also on the marketing side, just like you mentioned. I mean, you are on the marketing side as well, so I think you understand all the client needs. And I think the hardware part especially is super interesting because most of the interviews we have is on the hardware side. And
Yes.
whenever we talk with CEOs or founders of these kind of companies, especially in the industry, most of them talk about the challenges regarding the procurement process, especially on the pandemic. What would you say was the main challenge there, and how do you manage to solve it?
Yes. Without question, the pandemic really, really stretched our resources. Before the pandemic, I had essentially a half person dedicated to purchasing, procurement, managing our suppliers, ensuring that all of our components were here so that when production went to build a robot, they could build a robot. They weren't waiting around. During the pandemic, relatively early on, we decided to hire a full-time purchasing officer. And it was honestly the best decision we ever made because we had no idea how much the supply chains were going to go off the rails. And she has spent so much time identifying substitute components, working with other suppliers, tracking things, pushing them to deliver their order to us in a committed amount of time. It has been an enormous effort. I think thankfully at this stage, we're April 23, we really are starting to see those supply chains normalize. So that's not as much of an issue. And for us right now, it's back to the old issues. How do you continue to provide hardware to us very niche customers who are spread all over the world?
So I can see
Decades.
that behind you have the actual product. So can you share a little bit about it and how does it actually work?
Absolutely. So this is what we call a Kinarm Endpoint Lab. It is a bimanual robot, and hopefully you can see under here, there's actually two physical different robots or linkages. And what happens is a subject or patient will sit down at this virtual reality system, grab their robot, and be told to do a behavioral task. So they'll be given instruction, something simple. It'll be like, can you please hit all these balls away? The operator will start the task, and they will then see virtually in the workspace soft balls, which they're required to hit away. They feel like they're doing the game, right? It's very short, but it gets very difficult in just a very short period of time. What we're doing with all that information is understanding better how they're able to perform that really rapid bimanual task, because that person, that subject has to decide, okay, which hand am I going to use to hit the ball? Which one do I have to hit first? And as it gets faster and faster, you're having to make very, very quick decisions. What happens if you have a brain injury or some sort of neurological insult or disease, perhaps something like a stroke? What happens is that that part of your brain is affected and you will not be able to perform that task as effectively as you could when you were healthy. So what we do is while that person is playing that task, the robots are great at grabbing a ton of information. All of that data then is fed back in the computer. The operator presses a button, produces a report, and they can see very discreetly and quantitatively how that person, that subject performed to their age, sex, and matched control subject. So that we know whether they're in the healthy range or if they're well far from the healthy range. And we know that with really a high degree of precision. So what happens if someone has a stroke, for example, and they start to recover, we would hope to see those scores over time. So having a score that actually is changing and in response to your improvement is a really great thing for people who are doing rehabilitation. The problem right now is in this field, there are no high resolution scoring systems. All the scores that are used to essentially quantify brain function are very coarse. Someone will have a score from like 1 to 7 to measure the ability to perform this upper limb motor activity. That resolution is not enough to really tell is somebody getting better or not. Does this drug work or not? Is their disease progressing? This particular system is broadly available to all different indications, neurological and non-neurological, where you can actually use it to help understand and deliver and make treatment decisions. I would say that very broadly because we really are agnostic to the actual indication. We help neuroscientists and clinician scientists understand the brain, what's going wrong with the brain when there's a specific disease or injury. And where we're going is that we hope it will help clinicians also be able to better manage that brain injury to allow that patient to get better faster. We don't deliver treatment, we deliver very important information to the clinician to allow them to make good decisions about how to manage that injury.
I was curious about how the actual process worked, and you just shared it completely. So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
that's a lot of information.
Yeah, a lot of information, but really clear. So thank you. So this is like the pre-phase of actually going to the doctor, and it's like you're already going with them and showing them the actual report, right?
Exactly. So think what happens right now if again, person is seeing their neurologist, say they are known to be healthy or well, but they say, hey doc, I just don't feel right. Something's wrong, right? The neurologist will put them through a very long and extensive battery of tests that he or she will administer themselves to try and understand what parts of the brain are working. So it takes a lot of clinician time. It's very clinician intensive, and it also is very subjective. So the clinician's going to look at the person and say, okay, I'm going to hold up my finger, and now I want you to touch my finger and then touch your nose. So can you do that? If they can do that well, they'll get full points. If they miss their finger or miss their nose, then they'll lose a point or lose a couple points, depending on the scoring system. And so that changes the score maybe from 5 to 2 or something. That sort of coarseness in the scoring system is not precise enough to allow really a clinician to manage that patient and how that patient is doing or changing over time. With the Kinarm, we can tell very precisely whether their behavior and hence their function has changed over that period of time. Maybe they've got some sort of latent disease that is brewing, and then now they've got to figure out what is that disease? How do we understand that? How do we dissect it and actually diagnose it? Kinarm doesn't diagnose it, but Kinarm brings them really important information to understand what part of the brain is not working.
Do you have any specific time for the rehab process depending on the disease?
Very dependent on the particular indication and on the person, right? So the thing about stroke, it affects every person who has a stroke differently. The actual underlying impairments that a patient has from a stroke are different in every single case. How they will recover is different in every single case. So again, what we do is we provide that information to the clinician so that they understand, is that patient responding to therapy? What is the underlying impairment? That's what we want to be able to identify and then to quantify how much they are different from what we expect a healthy individual to be.
One of the last questions, what will you say are the next steps for Kinarm? Are you guys planning on expanding or releasing any new machine anytime soon?
So our hope right now and our sole focus is on pushing into more and more clinical research facilities. One of the questions I often get asked, is this a medical device? And right now it's not. It's for research, it's research instrumentation. So what we've been really working hard at doing, and this is where the engineering is not as fun as in the early days when you're just making prototypes, is we're ensuring that our design file is robust and sufficiently developed so that we can go and become a registered medical device. That is our focus right now. And with that, we think we'll be able to reach many more users and hopefully improve outcomes for brain injury around the world. That's our.
From your perspective, where do you think the future of the industry is going?
We've been at this long enough that we can see, looking back, that the idea of introducing a robot into a clinical setting was something that was really strange, not acceptable, not on anybody's radar. Then what happened, of course, was that they discovered that surgical robots that assist the surgeon in performing surgery much more efficiently with less time in the hospital, they realized how much benefit could be given to a patient. So suddenly having robots in a clinical environment is very acceptable and can be seen to provide much more efficient healthcare. So we hope in some ways that acceptance now of having more complex technologically devices in the clinic can help our healthcare practitioners be that much more efficient. So that's where we hope the world is going. Robots will help deliver more healthcare to more people for less cost. That's the hope.
Do you have any social media handles? Where can people find you or Kinarm?
Absolutely. So you can find us on Twitter at Kinarm Lab, and you can find us on the web at kinarm.com.
We'll make sure to follow you guys. And remember, guys, that you can also find more information, interesting articles, interesting interviews, like this one with Anne, directly on our website, ControlHub.com/pillar-nation. We would love to hear from you. And once again, Anne, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time. This was totally great.
You're most welcome.